It is easy to talk about a great game, really easy, when a game is firing on all cylinders, when its vision is crystalline and its execution clean, its brilliance almost speaks for itself. You don't have to stretch to praise it, greatness announces itself. But talking about a good game, a 7 out of 10, oh man, that is a mess. Good games live in this weird, frustrating purgatory. They are not bad enough to roast, not great enough to praise, and just irritating enough to keep you up at night. And that is exactly where The Alters lives. Now, I'm an optimistic guy, glass half full sort of person. So when you tell me that in 2025 a game launched with a trope and plot very similar to my favorite science fiction film, The Moon, even I couldn't keep my expectations in check. So yes, my expectations were unreasonable, not even close to fair. And that is my issue with The Alters. It is a good game, but I wish it was great. The experience of playing it was like dating a gorgeous girl who seems perfect, smart, funny, beautiful, but then one day during your first argument, you find out she has a very specific habit. She shits in your bed. And that's The Alters. Beautiful with a brilliant concept, but every now and then, splat, it drops a steaming pile of frustration on your mattress. So what is The Alters? On the surface, it's a simple premise. You crash on a hostile planet, your entire crew dead, the world outside, radioactive misery. Your mission? Survive long enough to harvest Rapidium, the whole reason you are here. But here's the twist. You can't run this entire base alone. So you start making clones, alternate versions of yourself, pulled from hypothetical life choices. And each alter has a unique personality, a unique skill set, and a unique way of making you question every decision you have ever made. This is the meat of the game, the narrative heart, the big idea. And wrapped around that idea is a gameplay loop that's half survival, half base management, and fully committed to making you reload your save multiple times an hour. And look, maybe I was playing it wrong, maybe I approached it with wrong mindset, but one thing I firmly believe, a video game should never feel like a job. And The Alters gameplay loop, it absolutely feels like a 9 to 5. It is tedium stacked on top of punishment, stacked on top of systems that punish you for making choices with your heart instead of your spreadsheet. There were 11 separate moments where I nearly uninstalled the game. 5 times in Act 2, 6 times in Act 3. But here's the thing, I kept playing. Not because the survival mechanics were addictive, they weren't. Not because the base management was satisfying, it wasn't. I kept playing because the story is phenomenal, but just like everything else in this game, it is also flawed. It is a genuinely good story that had the potential to be a masterpiece. The narrative is the carrot the game waves in front of you, whispering, "Come on, keep going, I promise the next cutscene will be worth it." And it almost is until you realize you might never see it. Why? Because the game is hellbent on burying that story under a mountain of chores. So what makes the story good? It is the alters themselves. In my playthrough, I created 6 alters. And these 6 little versions of Jan, they carried the entire experience. Each one feels real, not because they are dramatic or quirky, but because they are painfully plausible versions of who you could have been under slightly different circumstances. I also have to praise Alex Jordan, the voice actor for Jan and his alters. He did an amazing job voicing every single one of them. As someone with a psychology background, this really intrigues me. It's one thing to talk about the ego and identity as theories. It's another thing entirely to play around that notion in a game, where each character is shaped by different regrets, different fears, different choices, but the same you underneath. Without going into spoilers, these alters aren't just characters, they are mirrors. They force you to see all the parts of yourself you kind of wish weren't real. And honestly, they are the only reason I finished the game. If the characters were even slightly less compelling, the alters would have lost me permanently. This leads to the role-playing aspect. Even though this is the game's strongest area, deep down the system is flawed. Your dialogue choices directly affect how much your alters trust you. Pick the wrong answer, you see a red bubble pop up. That bubble basically says, "You messed up, this alter hates you now." And if too many of them hate you, they rebel. They work fewer hours, your survival becomes hell, and you end up doing even more tedious chores just to survive to the next act. So how do you avoid this? You stop role-playing honestly. You stop expressing yourself, you choose the safest option, the least offensive option, the don't make daddy angry option. And suddenly you are no longer exploring the different identities of Jan. You are managing them. You are taming them, you're keeping the peace with the versions of yourself that apparently hold grudges like professional Olympians. It creates this bizarre contradiction. The game wants to explore who you really are, but it punishes you for acting like yourself. It does not ruin the game for me, but it did limit me. And then there is the Act 2. Without spoiling anything, something happens, something significant, something that shifts the entire tone of the game. And after this event, the storytelling takes a massive step back. The survival difficulty spikes, the resource management ramps up, the emotional focus vanishes, and suddenly the story becomes quiet. Way too quiet until the finale. From Act 2 to the Act 3 finale, it gets so bad that the best part of the entire experience, interacting with the alters, is forced to take a back seat. Not because you don't want to talk to them, but because the game keeps you busy doing meaningless chores. And if you're like me, someone who kept delaying the big objective because you wanted to prepare properly or explore a little more, oh boy, you are going to pay for that. The punishments are brutal, because the game does a terrible trick. Even though the mission log says you have to build one thing in order to move forward, you can be sure you have to do a lot more after that. And I was gullible enough to think that I would be having enough time to do all of it during the last 2-3 days before the sunrise actually kicked in. But most of the time you actually need 7 to 10 days in advance in-game hours to actually do it. You don't just fail, you redo everything. And I had to redo everything multiple times, 11 to be exact. And it would be fine if the survival mechanic was actually fun, but it isn't. And every time I had to redo all the dialogue choices, all the interactions, to the point where it almost felt like my first playthrough wasn't really a first playthrough. And it's here in the space between frustration and exhaustion that the real problem shows its face. Because all of these decisions, all of these punishment-heavy systems, they start to suffocate the pacing. The story was the glue holding everything together. It was the emotional backbone. So when the story fades into the background, when you're left alone with just the mechanics, the flaws become painfully clear. On its own, the management gameplay isn't fun. It isn't rewarding. It isn't something you push through because you love the challenge. It is something you endure. And exploration, forget it. Nothing in this world encourages curiosity. The moment you step outside the base, it feels like the game is tapping its watch, reminding you that you're wasting time, that you should really get back inside and start spinning the next hamster wheel. That is why I cannot wrap my head around the people on Reddit saying the game requires multiple playthroughs. Multiple playthroughs? Really? Friend, why? Why would I ever do that? There are games like Disco Elysium, masterpieces of narrative where replaying them actually gives you new insight, new meaning, new texture to the world. You walk away from those games feeling like you gained something. Replay the altars for what? The ending barely differs. Aside from one specific path, they're a variation of the same ideas, different flavors, same dish. The only real difference are minor interactions, but nothing worth another 15-20 hours of survival chores. And I know Disco Elysium also has only like 2 or 3 endings. But unlike the altars, games like Disco Elysium have a much smoother journey all across. Honestly, it is easier and smarter to just watch the alternate endings on YouTube. You'll get the emotional payoff without sacrificing your sanity to the sunrise timer. And that is the sad part. A game built entirely on the idea of exploring your alternate selves isn't worth playing a second time. So my final thoughts? Here is the real tragedy of the altars. You can see the greatness, you can feel it, you can taste it. You know in your bones that this could have been one of the best sci-fi narratives in years. The concept is brilliant, the altars are unforgettable. The identity themes are genuinely profound. But all of that brilliance is constantly wrestling the gameplay, like the game's own system are holding it down, preventing it from standing up and shining. So The Altars is just a good game, not great, not iconic, not legendary, just good. Painfully good, tormentingly good. And somehow that hurts more than if it had simply been bad. Bad games don't haunt you. Good games with wasted potential absolutely do. If anything, The Altars ends up reflecting its own philosophy. It's a game about versions of yourself. Some better, some worse, all connected by possibility. And The Altars itself feels like one of those versions. In some alternate timeline, maybe there's a version of this game that nailed everything. Survival mechanics that support the story instead of suffocating it. Role-playing systems that encourage honesty instead of punishing it. And a narrative that stays present from start to finish. In that timeline, I think The Altars is a masterpiece, maybe even a classic, but in our timeline, we got the flawed version, the imperfect version, The version that still matters, still resonates, still hits deep, but never quite reaches the greatness it aimed for. It's a game I appreciate, a game I enjoyed, a game I wish I could love. And maybe that is the most poetic ending possible. The Altars makes you confront the versions of yourself that could have existed, and then becomes a game that could have been great. So, do I recommend it? On sale, yes. It is not a bad game, far from it. I just wish it was better. Peace out.